you're on.
Hey, welcome to the Michael Gecht Show and Gabby Lode's show, who incidentally is conspicuous by our absence. What do you think happened to her, Tom?
Well, a month ago she was supposed to be here and she was an hour and a half late, so who knows? Probably the same story. Blaming it on the traffic. She's probably with the Uber driver somewhere doing something.
I see.
My guess.
Well, we might as well talk a little baseball. Tom Lord to my left here. At one time, the Yankees were my team to follow. And I got a little bit turned off after Roger Maris was treated so shabbily by their fans. And he was a hardcore, everything counts baseball player, not a showy type of person. And he did nothing wrong in my eyes except become less popular than Mickey Mantle for reasons unknown to me. And he finally, aged prematurely, a lot of gray hairs from being abused and not responding to the taunts. And then one day, in a game where he had 2 doubles and 2 home runs, he was circling the bases, and there was a round of boos from the Yankee fans, the hometown boys. And he went in the dugout, and unfortunately the camera was following him. And then he came out of the dugout and rested his 2 elbows on the top of the dugout steps and flashed the magic fingers to the crowd, and he was fined for it. And I recall Phil Rizzuto said, "Mel, did you see that? Did you see that? Maris gave him the finger." But it seems he could do nothing right in the eyes of the Yankee fans. And finally, the final insult was getting traded away to the St. Louis Cardinals because they thought he was malingering. And they could find no cause for him to be claiming an injury. And then it was discovered he had a broken bone in his hand, and he still came back and helped the Cardinals win a World Series. And when he retired, the Yankees, true to tradition, did not offer him any kind of a coaching job. As they didn't with Elston Howard, he ended up getting a coaching job with their sworn enemies, the Boston Red Sox. Whereas Roger Maris got a brewery courtesy of the owner, Gus Busch. So,
Well, brewery's not bad, is it? Well, I was not a Yankee fan growing up. I mean, I didn't have a hate for the Yankees, but I was a Washington Senator fan. I grew up in Bethesda, Maryland. And I do remember 1961, though, in the race between Maris and Mantle. And I do know that Roger lost a lot of hair during that, under the stress of the pennant race. Turns out, most people don't know this fun fact, but the condition he had was alopecia areata, where the hair falls out in little ring-like, it's about the size of a quarter clumps. It's a stress-related autoimmune disease. So it's, if you're under stress, your own system starts to attack the hair follicles, and it falls out in little round circles. Luckily, it can be treated with steroids, and the hair will grow back. So he wasn't permanently maimed by it. But Roger Maris, unfortunate. Well, the home run race that's going on now with Judge, I'm hoping that he breaks the 61 in 154 games, because that was the original record. 154 by Babe Ruth, and Roger Maris got the asterisk for 61 home runs in 162 games after they expanded the league with 2 expansion teams. And so Judge is right there to do it, and I don't hear anybody mentioning the fact that 154 games is the real official landmark to break the original Babe Ruth record.
yes. Ford Frick, the commissioner then, made it a point to mention that, since he was a staunch Babe Ruth fan.
Ford Frick recently did? He's still alive?
Well, no, this was
Back in the day.
back in the day.
Yeah.
But also in today's statistical record books, it was mentioned in one of the media publications that he was going to break the American League record.
Mm-hmm.
And Maris didn't own the American League record either. That was the right-handed hitter, Mark McGwire from the Oakland A's.
Right. But all those records after Maris were tainted.
They were tainted not only from the steroids, but in 1989 or thereabouts is when they introduced the new baseball. And there were ball players that went from hitting 3 home runs a year to 13 or 10 to 18. Every ball coming off the bat had the potential of getting out. I had never seen before a guy hit a check swing home run. And that's what has happened with this. The ball just took off, and guys swinging off the wrong foot, and boom, it's into the. Now they become so enraptured by this. They give the velocity of the baseball leaving the ballpark, the speed of it getting hit on a line drive to the shortstop.
Right.
It's getting a little bit absurd.
What do they call it with the upward tilted swing? What do they call that? Got a name for it. Everybody's swinging uppercut, trying to.
Oh yeah, the rising angle of the bat.
You know, think about this for a minute. When it comes to a pitcher throwing a ball hard, if you throw directly overhand and pull down and get backspin on the ball and it rises, you will be able to, as an outfielder, for example, throw further if you've got the backspin. Similarly with hitting, if you chop down and get backspin, the ball will rise and go longer. So this upward swing is really not it's not really the way to hit a lot of home runs. You're going to get downspin. A lot of balls are going to come down. Plus, you're not in your bat's not in the zone as long when you're swinging at an angle when you want to be flat and maybe the ball comes in and you hit it square.
An interesting change from the 50s and 60s with a lot of ballparks. They went from the natural turf to the artificial turf, and it encouraged ball players on teams that had speedsters to hit down on the ball, so they got that extra bounce and they could get infield hits for it, running down first base. And they asked Ted Williams about it, and he was enraged in his response. He said, "It's one of the hardest things in the world to do is to hit a baseball square, and that's the way you swing. It's square. If it's not square, you're not a baseball player."
Ironically, when you think about it, like when a tennis player putting topspin or backspin on the ball, when it comes to hitting a baseball, if you want to get it through the infield on artificial turf, you are going to want to put topspin on it because those balls will take off on the second bounce and shoot through. So there's a lot of little things going on, but today, with the 200 strikeouts a year for people and nothing but home runs or strikeouts, it's kind of boring. The games lasting 4 hours because of the television commercials, etc. I remember growing up looking at the box score every day, hoping that a Washington Senator would hit 300 and the team would get to 500. This was about 1960. And the times of the games were often under 2 hours.
Yes. I had experience of unwrapping some insulation in the basement of the house, and when the furnaces were installed, it was around the 1920s. So I unraveled a lot of the old newspapers, and I would go right to the baseball scores. I'd see some games an hour and 58 minutes,
Right.
2 hours and 10 minutes, and
Who would sit through 4 hours? I mean, today I have to wind the TV back so that I can fast forward through the commercials, or I'll be asleep in an hour.
yes, and I remember most Yankee games had their Valentine commercials done while the game was in progress, and the camera was on the field, and Mel Allen, ever enthusiastic about doing a big beer commercials, would have
Was New York Valentine? Was that the?
at that time it was baseball and Valentine. What a
I
treat!
remember that slogan. I was in Washington, D.C. growing up in Bethesda, Maryland. My grandfather was in Baltimore. There are two separate markets. Baltimore had Ham's beer at the land of, and I think that was the one with the land of sky blue waters.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I can't remember if Washington had Pabst beer. Might have been Pabst. But they were all beer beer commercials back in the day. And the guys in the off season, they worked on beer trucks. Some of them for an off season job.
Yes,
A lot of beer in those days.
and Billy Crystal, who you pointed out earlier in our conversation, was a big Yankee fan, but I really don't know if he knows the history of the Yankees that well. He said that the fans were heavily enthusiastic. They treated Roger Maris real well. He was very popular, which was not true. And he said, I can't understand why they ever let Mel Allen go as an announcer. Well, my neighbor used to see a few Yankee games a year, and he remembers when they didn't have the sky boxes and the preferential cutoffs, for the exclusive seating, and so that the announcers had to go to the general franchise and get their snacks and drinks the same way that the poorer people did. And Mel Allen, it was in the fourth inning, was leaving one of the food stands, and he was looking up at the announcing booth on the upper level as though he had to, climb Mount Everest. He was bombed by the fourth inning. And he would be telling baseball stories, and then a pitcher come in, he said, a curveball, low and outside. Well, Camilo Pascual was always a good curveball pitcher. And he would follow that up until the next pitch, and then he would start another story. So it was a series of untold or unfinished stories by him, and they realized he's got to go,
Well, as a transplanted New Yorker and a baseball fan, coming here really right at the beginning of the heyday, late 90s, 95 through, that's when I arrived. I got hooked on the Yankees immediately. Probably would have left New York, honestly. But I was coming from San Francisco, by the way, not Maryland, where I grew up. But Jim Cott was my favorite announcer here because he was an early Washington Senator. And he left with the team when they left and went to Minnesota. They became the Minnesota Twins. But he was always bringing up people like Camilo Pascual and Pedro Ramos and Jim Lemon, Bob Allison, Harmon Killebrew. He would talk about them and mention those names. And so, recently he was inducted into, I think, the Broadcasters Hall of Fame about a month ago. And one of my high school, actually my brother's age, classmates, Tim Kirchin, who's an announcer on ESPN, Nothing But Baseball, was also inducted. And the two of them together, because the Kirchin family were big-time Washington Senator fanatics, if I'd been able to go and I was invited to that ceremony in Cooperstown, I would have loved to have talked to Jim Cott about all those guys, and he would have probably loved to reminisce with somebody who remembers them as a 10-year-old, because that's I think Camilo Pascual is in the Hall of Fame. I think he made it.
I don't know if he is, but I do remember a Yankee game in the stadium, and Camilo Pascual was pitching, and they halted the game. A couple of fans came out of the stands and put the Cuban flag, or draped it over his shoulders, and
he had the curveball, the 12. They call it the 12-6 curveball that just drops straight down off the table. And he was a strikeout artist, and his buddy Pedro Ramos was the other good pitcher on the team. And that was around 1960 when Castro opened up the border and the whole influx for 1 year of Cubans. And I remember names like the Yankee infield, Zoilo Versailles, Julio Becerra, Paul Castanova was the catcher. I used to like to get to the games a little early, and all these guys were so colorful and flamboyant and laughing and jovial and having such a great time. I was a big fan of those guys, but they couldn't get to 500, and they couldn't produce a 300 hitter.
Who was, which one of the Aspromonte brothers was it that played for Washington?
Aspromonte. The name's familiar, but I don't remember.
It was Bob Aspromonte and Ken. One later on played for the Houston Colt 45s, who became the Astros.
Yeah. I remember the name. I don't know. Remember. Did you have a baseball card collection?
A small one. I would always lose them when we were scaling cards. In fact, I do remember seeing the Yankee rookie card for Mickey Mantle at that time.
Same here.
The one that now is several $1 million, but of course, even if I had it, it wasn't in mint condition by any means.
I remember having that one in my hand. We used to play the games where you'd throw it up against the wall, and the one that would land closest, you got to take the cards, or flipping them somehow, another thing. Did you keep them in a cigar box?
No, rubber band.
Yeah, rubber bands in a cigar box. That's the way they were usually stored.
Yeah.
And most of the time a kid had a good collection, their mother ended up throwing them out. In fact, a friend of mine had a Mickey Mantle bat from the game Mickey Mantle. They were in Baltimore, and they were always able to sneak into the Orioles games as little kids, and somehow he ended up with a Mickey Mantle bat. And again, that with his baseball cards got tossed by somebody cleaning out the house and didn't recognize the value. Just didn't even open the box or the bag that was containing the baseball cards. out they went. So many people have stories like that from our youth.
I remember Griffith Stadium,
Mm-hmm.
the Washington,
Yep.
and I don't recall any left field being as cavernous as theirs was, and yet it was no big deal for Roy Sievers or Harmon Killebrew to hit it into the upper deck.
Right. Griffith Stadium I remember well because one of my classmates, his father was a hairdresser, would always take us on his birthday, May 15th, or was it 16th? I think my brother's 15th, whatever. Anyway, we would get to go every year to the baseball game. He would take about 10 kids, and we would sit in the bleachers in the outfield, and it was just a wooden thing. But the outfield fence in Griffith Stadium was painted green, and it was just vertical slats. That was Griffith Stadium. And then they finally got rid of it and went to RFK Stadium. But the funny part was, I went to the baseball game to sit when we were watching a doubleheader, and the second game was going a little longer. By the way, it was almost finished at 5. My mother had told me I needed to be home by 5, and the father asked if any of us needed to go or whatever, and I was the only kid who said that he had to be home by 5, which caused all of us to have to go. And he said, "You're the only kid here who's paying attention to the game," which was true. I was really a baseball fanatic. But yeah, Griffith Stadium I remember very well, yeah. That was in a bad part of Washington, D.C. It was not in a good part of town. But that's where we would watch ball games, and probably only got to go to about two games a year back then. It wasn't like now when you can watch them all on TV. It was a real big deal for me and my family to get to go to a professional baseball game.
I'm trying to remember if they were still in Washington when Dick Donovan hit 2 home runs in a game.
Now, I don't remember that. Your perspective is different than mine. You're coming from were you a Yankee fan or a Red Sox fan?
I was a Yankee fan up until '63.
Okay.
But I was always a Red Sox fan second to that, and then after that, it was Red Sox all the way.
Yeah.
I was a big Ted Williams fan, even though I caught him at the tail end of his career. And they had been grooming Yastrzemski for the spot. And Ted Williams asked him, how you doing, how you feeling? He says, "I feel pretty good, but I'm a little confused. I know I've been hitting the ball the way I want to. I've been seeing the pitches well, but they want me to pull the ball more." He says, "Screw them." He says, "This is the way you got to professional baseball and to the major leagues. Some of these guys don't know their ass from a hole in the ground. You just keep doing what you're doing. That pulling of the ball will come naturally."
I actually remember also catching Ted Williams at the tail end. I think he was already over 40 when I started watching him as a kid. Another one was a left-handed pitcher, Warren Spahn, who was a great pitcher. I caught him at the tail end of his career too, so we didn't get to appreciate them in their prime. But Ted Williams had the connection to Washington, D.C. and the Senators. He was the manager for a year, maybe it was 2, for the Washington Senators, which was a big deal because Ted was such a great player. You wondered whether he was going to be able to take on the role of manager. But he did take a couple of their players. One of them was slick fielding shortstop. Look at that. Wouldn't you know it? Somebody wants a consultation. That's a whole nother story. Anyway, where was I? Ted Williams. Yeah, taking the shortstop, a strong-armed, slick-fielding Ed Brinkman, whose brother happened to be an umpire in the major leagues too, took him from a 190 hitter to a 250 hitter by taking a fat Nellie Fox style bat and choking way up and just punching Judy, making contact, got him up to 250. And another player, he still may be in baseball today, was a coach for a very long time, Frank Howard. They called him Hondo with the glasses. He was 6'7", one of the first of that size, who was either was a home run hitter, and he would hit the ball through the box and take the pitcher's head off. But he got him hitting, I think, 300 with an inordinate number of home runs. So those 2 projects really panned out. And by the way, thinking back about it, how about all these strikeouts today? 200 strikeouts. Oof. It was launch angle. That's what we were trying to think of before with the angle. But anyway, all these strikeouts today, it's either home runs with the launch angle or striking out 200 times is acceptable. in my opinion, makes a pretty boring game. And they can't even beat the shift, can't even go to the opposite field and collect a couple of hits that way. So I looked it up recently about the players of note that we remember, how many strikeouts they had in a year, and players like Frank Robinson, and think off the top of my head, these guys had 50 strikeouts, maybe even less, and hitting still 40 plus home runs.
Yeah.
200 home runs, you'd be out of the game. Over 100 was considered terrible back in the day.
The only one in the current game that I can think of that has impressed me with his lack of strikeouts, 6 or 7 strikeouts in over 100 at-bats, the player for the Mets, Jeff McNeil.
Okay.
And again, a punch-and-Judy type of hitter. He knew how to go to the opposite field, and it's a shameful thing that they're starting to dictate the defensive alignment of a ball club. 60 years ago, they were doing the shift on Ted Williams, and it never upset anybody then, because most of the players back then could hit to the opposite field if they needed to. Mm-hmm. Most of the players today are dead pull hitters from their natural side. Mm. The more successful, and probably one of the most successful, was Clemente, mm-hmm. who was a good bad ball hitter, as was Moose Skowron, who was with the Yankees, a great bad ball hitter.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Yogi Berra was one of the greats.
Oh, yes. If they moved the foul pole over another foot, it could have had another 50 home runs.
Mm-hmm. Did you play baseball?
I played a little bit at Sandlot, but I never played varsity baseball in high school or anything like that.
I played from second grade all the way through college. Didn't miss a year. And went to University of Maryland on a baseball scholarship. I pitched the championship game for our high school team. And by the way, my high school was named Walter Johnson High School.
Wow.
Yeah, how about that? And my claim to fame today is that the guy who was playing shortstop went with me to the University of Maryland, and he became a pitcher. He grew to be 6'4", and so therefore he had the major league size, and I stayed stunted at 5'9", and probably would have needed Tommy John surgery because my elbow was getting sore, and I went strictly back and played outfield, gave up pitching. And he gave up shortstop and just became a pitcher. Now, I used to catch him when I was a kid because I would catch one year. The next year I'd be a little stronger, I'd be a pitcher. Then I'd move up to a newer league. I'd catch again, and then I would pitch. And the catching kept me on the team. I just happened to have a great throwing arm, So I'd have that ear to catch, grow a little bit, pitch, catch, grow a little bit. So anyway, my claim to fame, I have to say, it's kind of funny that my friend who I used to catch for, and by the way, he threw straight overhand and had the 12-6 curveball, but he was wild. And so anytime he would have to let up to get the ball over the plate, the ball came straight as an arrow. And even at the time, the younger players tattooed him. And there was one game where he hit a couple of guys, and then on the next guy, I kiddingly said, under my breath, "Come on, Bob, let's hit this guy." What happened? He hit the guy. The batter was hopping up and down. I got thrown out of the game. He got thrown out of the game too. We had to forfeit the game. Yeah. And the funny part about that was on the ride home, it was pouring rain on the Washington Beltway, and I'm going home with a friend of mine in the right passenger side, and we were on the road in the pouring rain. All of a sudden, the car hydroplaned 90 degrees, and we're going down the highway at 55 miles an hour, like that, sideways, and then flipped right back in, and both of us just like, we went down on our seats, and I slowed down about 25 miles an hour. So that's a memory. But the claim to fame is that I pitched the high school game with the guy who later became a #1 draft pick as a pitcher. And he got recently inducted into the University of Maryland Hall of Fame for baseball. And he played, I think, 6 or 7 years, hurt his arm. And I saw him at our 50th reunion last couple of years back. I asked him about his injury, and I said, "What happened? What was the injury that finished your career?" He told me what it was, and I said, "Well, did you ever throw a ball again? Did you ever play baseball again?" He said, "Oh yeah, I did." He said, "Well, what happened with the arm?" He goes, "Well, it took eight months to heal. The arm healed." And I said, "What happened to your career?" He goes, "Well, after 8 months, they let me go. That was just the end of it." And he became a physical therapist, probably from all the physical therapy he had during that period of 8 months, and had a good career that way. So, yeah, that's an aside.
A little trivia note with regarding to the pitching. Uh, a lot of these guys in the minor leagues, they start them out in the Appalachian League, I think, to see if they can handle the fastball because they had a lot of guys that really could throw it, and then they put them up to the next level where the pitches through the breaking pitches, and that was a cutoff for a lot of these guys.
Right.
They couldn't hit the curveball.
Right.
But Roberto Clemente started out as a pitcher, and he had been somebody, and he was getting a little wild, but his style of hitting didn't, escape the attention of the coaching staff, and they decided we're going to get him squeezed into the lineup. In the meantime, they were trying to hide him on the roster out in the bullpen, like he was a warm-up pitcher. At that time, he was playing for Montreal in the Pacific Coast League in the Dodger system, and the Pittsburgh Pirates knew what he was and what the potential was, and they picked him up for a song.
He was had a great throwing arm. I think he could throw it from the right field corner on the fly to third base.
And he really faked out Roger Maris in the '60 World Series because he pulled the stunt of looking like he was fumbling with the ball. So Roger Maris was pretty attentive, went to second, and he got Maris out, and Maris was like, hands on his hips, looking out there. Well, you got me on that one, pal.
Remember those days of the home run derby that they'd have in black and white TV? And they had it on some kind of a small field, but Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays might be competing for home run derby. Did you ever watch that?
Once or twice, yeah.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, that's bygone stuff. But anyway, tell me more about the Boston Red Sox.
Boston Red Sox had a kitty core of pitching, and Don Schwall was one in the late 50s. He was going to be a superstar. Bill Monbouquet, then later on Earl Wilson. And the steady catcher that came up the same time as Don Schwall was Jim Pagliarone, who was a dead first ball hitter. No matter where, anywhere around the plate, first pitch he was going to go for. So he had about a 6-year career, and then he moved on, as did Jackie Jensen, who was originally a Yankee, and he didn't like to fly, and that's one of the reasons.
Yes, wrap it up.
Okay, we have to go now. We have to pause, and we'll be seeing you a little later on.
But it could have been more professionally done. That's what I'm thinking. If we had like a card, like they all have a cue card.
Yeah, because that was hopscotching,
Yeah.